Hey guys, today we're going to be checking out Battlefield 6, the open beta using the RX 9060 XT. We're using the XFX Swift OC model of the card. It has 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 video memory. Keep in mind this card does come in both an 8 and a 16 gigabyte variant, so this is the 16 gigabyte variant. We're playing on the latest AMD drivers and pairing with a 9800 X3D as well as 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. And as far as our Adrenaline software, it does detect the beta. However, there is no support for FSR4 out of the box. I have seen some people online be able to tweak it and implement FSR4, but just if you know me, you've seen my videos, you may know I don't like to tweak FSR settings in multiplayer games where there is anti-cheat involved. So I have seen people, with success not get banned, implement those settings. Not something I'm personally going to be doing. I personally think it's better to wait for official support when you're talking about a multiplayer title, but that's just me. Let's hop in. Now, as far as our settings, we're going to start off here at 1080p full screen, and there's a few different performance presets. What these do is not only change your graphics preset, but also change your rendering resolution. So I do kind of like that. That's not something I noticed the first time, but I do like that it's a bit split up. However, we're going to come in here and do a little bit more tweaking. So we're going to start off here at high for 1080p, and we will go ahead and implement that restart. And then for FSR, we're going to put this just here on quality, just to see, or actually, you know what, to begin with, let's just see what it can do at native. So this is just high native TAA. And we'll go ahead and hit that restart, which thankfully there's no queue. So this is just going to be high 1080p at native resolution. All right, so dropping in here at high settings, native resolution, this is just using TAA, which at 1080p TAA, although it does resolve like the sharp lines, it does have a tendency to make the image look a bit softer, a bit blurrier than you would otherwise see. But regardless, here on native resolution, we are getting what I'd consider to be, especially for Battlefield, a competitive frame rate. In my mind, typically for first-person shooter or any kind of like shooter, multiplayer, competitive type games, I consider personally anything above 120 FPS to be like in that competitive range. Not like a strict rule or anything like that, but just kind of me personally, that's what I typically like to see. Some slight dips, you can see like when we kind of ran through this smoke, it did dip below 120 briefly, but really hanging really strongly right around 120 or so, and at times much higher. So definitely pretty nice to see. This is using that Frostbite engine, which is a bespoke engine made specifically for the Battlefield series. So it is certainly nice to see that the game is still running really well. It's the same engine that older Battlefield titles were developed in, and it looks great. I mean, even here on high settings, it still is an incredibly good looking game in my opinion. Not really asking for much more. If I have any complaints, it's really just the TAA in my opinion here. Doesn't look great. Kind of just results in a soft image. I mean, we are playing on a relatively low resolution 1080p, but a 9060 XT. This is really a 1080p card that can be stretched, especially when you have FSR4. Can be stretched to some of those more premier resolutions like 1440p and then maybe 4K in some cases, which we'll certainly check out. But definitely nice to see that at high settings, really no need for any FSR in my opinion here. And because we are on FSR 3, at least for now, maybe, in the future, certainly possible that FSR 4 will be implemented. And then when that happens, there may be a case of just throwing on FSR 4 at quality, because when we have a better model like that, you can kind of go in, put it on quality, and get kind of best of both worlds. You get better anti-aliasing than TAA, and also a slight improvement to, your performance. So, I don't know why that guy respawned there, but that's okay. But, and I do have faith that they will implement FSR 4. I'm not sure if the devs have actually spoken about it, but this is a relatively new release, and it still has some time before the game actually ships. So I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if they do actually go in and implement FSR 4 before the game's full release. But even without it here at 1080p, really not much to complain about. The fact that we are able to play at high settings and get such a high FPS is certainly very, very promising and really nice to see. I should also mention while we're here that I am playing this classic conquest mode, which is 32v32. So this is kind of my opinion, the bread and butter of Battlefield. There are larger modes, you know, where there's like 64 players, and there's also obviously, because I definitely misclicked there, there's definitely also smaller, more like intimate modes. So this kind of just gives you a good estimate of what you can roughly see in some different, you know, environments here. But obviously keep in mind that if you have more players on the screen or more vehicles, and depending on map size, things like that. In my previous testing, what I kind of noticed is that larger maps, actually this is one of the smaller maps, but larger maps seem to kind of have higher FPS, and I don't know exactly what the cause of that is, or if that's 100% true all the time. It kind of seems a little bit backwards, but my rationale is just that maybe, you know, a smaller map like this, it's having to kind of render in and deal with all these players and vehicles and things really close by, as opposed to a larger map. Maybe it doesn't need to, you know, in layman's term, doesn't really need to like worry about everything the same way. So, but regardless, you know, sitting right around 118 on our FPS average, totally great place to be at. No anti-aliasing issues whatsoever. TAA looks solid enough here. Not really the need for any upscaling, in my opinion, at this setting. Even though our FPS is already very high, no harm in just seeing what the FSR looks like. So let's just turn it down to FSR balanced. This will be more like, you know, if you are just very, very competitive and you're okay with getting a slightly worse image, and, you know, you just want higher FPS. So at balanced here, the game still looks okay. It does look like sharper in some scenes, like if you're not in motion, it does look sharper, and we are obviously getting a pretty considerable boost to our FPS. In my personal opinion, going from 120 to 180 at the cost of some visual clarity isn't necessarily worth it, but even at FSR balanced, you know, you can definitely play with your settings here. The other thing that is important to mention, I do get this comment a lot, and it's, you know, definitely fair to point out, but the 9800 X3D is a bit of an unusual pairing with the 9060 XT. It's just the processor that I have in my main rig here, so it's typically what I test with, and for most tests it's good. But on games like this, where this is a very CPU demanding game, you can see that's evident by the fact that our CPU usage is relatively high. You know, most situations I die right away, but most gaming situations you'll see CPU usage like around the 30% mark. You can see obviously here we're, you know, at like 50% CPU utilization, so it's definitely possible that if you had a more modest pairing, that the CPU might pull you back a little bit. Now, our bottleneck is not our CPU by any means, but do keep that in mind. You know, it's very likely that you may lose, you know, 10 FPS or so, depending on your CPU pairing. I get that comment sometimes because I think people, you know, see the results and are curious why they're not getting the same results, when I don't really point that out. And a lot of that is, you know, especially in a game like this, could be due to the fact of this particular CPU pairing. But it's definitely nice to see that 1080p, which really this card is, you know, it's a 1080p card in my opinion. It's really, you know, a card that is definitely targeted 1080p, and it's nice to see that, you know, modern AAA game like this that looks as great as this does, you're able to get, you know, really competitive frames. And really my only complaint here is just I would like to see I'd like to see FSR 4, so hopefully that's implemented by release. All right, next up, moving over to 1440p here, and we're going to start off here on the high graphics preset. And just to see what we can do here, we'll go ahead and stick with native resolution. So using TAA, which for 1440p TAA will look much, much better. And as far as our upscaling, I don't think this matters because our upscaling is off. So we're just using TAA for our anti-aliasing on high settings here at 1440p. All right, so here at 1440p, we are also on this larger map here. So this typically has slightly better performance, so what I've experienced, than the small map. And even here, while we are getting certainly playable FPS, we are now dipping under that like competitive type FPS, meaning that, you know, you could absolutely perform, have a great time playing here, high settings, 1440p native. You know, there are definitely some instances where maybe, you know, you might be at a competitive disadvantage to someone who maybe has a higher frame rate. That's an edge case, but just what I would consider competitive FPS, this isn't quite hitting that mark. But Obviously at 1440p and high settings, I mean, this is an absolutely gorgeous looking game, and the type of performance that we are getting on a relatively inexpensive GPU here, and in my opinion, by today's standards for sure, this is pretty inexpensive. Definitely pretty happy with, oh my god, snipers everywhere, but pretty happy with the performance here, right around in the 90s. And not only is it in the 90s, it's holding pretty strongly in the 90s, meaning that we're not really dropping below 90. Our 1% low is sitting right around 80. I'll go ahead and restart counting here, just due to the fact that hopping in and out menus, sometimes that could lower your FPS or make your FPS actually go up, which gives us slightly inaccurate results. But the other thing to keep in mind is our video memory, which is not super accurate using really any sort of, any sort of monitoring software. You're not really going to get super accurate representation for video memory as far as like what's being allocated versus used. It gives you kind of a rough idea, but we are now seeing just over 8 gigabytes, which seems to indicate that maybe if we were to be on the 8 gigabyte variant here, we could potentially be seeing some sort of bottlenecking with our video memory. So not super surprising. I mean, these are, high settings, native resolution, very, very large maps. Definitely a lot of stuff going on here. So not super surprising that we are seeing, not what I would consider to be like outrageous video memory usage, but it is kind of creeping up there, especially as we kind of begin to, run around here. But overall, definitely pretty happy with the performance here. If you want to play it native at 1440p, you're not going to be having a bad experience by any means. You're still going to be having, definitely playable, smooth frames. It's just not going to be in that ultra competitive, like 120 plus, like we were seeing at 1080p. So, which kind of, goes right in line with what I kind of expected from this card, given that this is a 1080p card first, and then really you can stretch it to 1440p, especially the 16 gigabyte variant is one that, definitely has some room to impress when it comes to these higher resolutions, whether it's 1440p and especially when we eventually here move up to 4K. So as I'm trying to pull the, I don't know why every time I jump in a game like this, I have a hard time just benchmarking it without actually trying to get some kills. But regardless, definitely pretty happy with the performance here. Now the next thing to do is really just to see if we can squeeze a little bit more performance out of it using FSR. Now we're not super far away from kind of that space where we want to be at, so let's just go ahead and we'll go for FSR, and let's just go for balanced here and see if that brings us up into that more competitive type 120 plus range. And right away it does seem that just putting it on balanced FSR, which I believe uses FSR 3.1, I believe is the model that they put us on. Now, FSR 3 in general is not a super great FSR model, but when you're already at a high resolution, going to, even FSR 3, as long as we're not, asking too much of our FSR, as long as we're, rendering from a somewhat decent resolution to begin with, we're going to get pretty good results, which is exactly what we're seeing here. So, clean looking image, solid FPS, right into that, right up into that kind of competitive area, right around 120 or so. So definitely happy with the performance overall here at 1440p. Now I do want to test, while we get into new game here, I do want to test, see if we can get that performance maybe at the cost of just, instead of using FSR, maybe just going and implementing lower settings. So first things first here, we'll go ahead and turn off our upscaling. So back on TAA. And now all I want to do here is just crank down from high down to medium settings. I don't want to go all the way down to low, just due to the fact that, I mean, on a modern graphics card, I don't think you should really be going for low settings at all, but we'll just go for medium here back on native resolution TAA to see if that kind of corrects anything. All right, so we're back here now on a different map, so keep that in mind. Sometimes, change of scenery, change of map can definitely affect your FPS. But we are seeing here, going down to medium settings, definitely an improvement when it comes to our FPS, where we're getting like in the 80s, 90s. Now we're pretty consistently above 100 and definitely averaging above 100 at this point. So, And honestly, the actual visual clarity, like the quality of the graphics, in my opinion, it's not super different. I mean, it still looks really solid. Really, in a game like this, I mean, unless you're really like a visual snob, you just want to not be at a disadvantage. So you just want to have good enough visuals that you can still make out everything that you need to make out. And that definitely seems to be the case here. I mean, like looking at this image, if I told you that this was high or ultra settings, I mean, in my opinion, it looks great. So I would definitely believe someone if they said that. And let's see if we can get some effects here. Slightly drop our FPS. Do see obviously our video memory slightly go down as we immediately get into the end of the match. Must put us into a match that was ending there, but definitely dropping down to medium from high is another option. If you wanted to do that instead of using FSR, you certainly could, and that way you're still playing at native resolution if that's important to you, and you don't have to use FSR. So another option for you there. All right, last resolution here, moving up to 4K, which I'm imagining we will have to use a bit of trickery to get this to work. We're going to go ahead and leave it on the medium preset for our graphics. And let's just see what it can do at native resolution. So we'll just do medium here at native, see if that gets us into any sort of playable area. All right, so loading in here at 4K. Again, this is medium settings, so not the highest settings, but it is nice to see that we are able to get what appears to be about 60 FPS. Now, 4K is no joke, like this is far, far more pixels than 1440p and certainly 1080p, and not really what this card was designed to do. So it is nice to see that, a modern AAA game that you can just come in here, and really, as long as you're okay dumping down to medium settings, you are able to get 60 FPS, which is pretty nice. And while I certainly wouldn't consider this to be like a competitive FPS, this certainly is, plenty FPS to come in here, have some fun. You can still perform and, play the game normally, so long as you're not like looking to, be the best player of all time. If you're really taking the game competitively, this is probably not going to be adequate as far as the performance that you're getting, but it's certainly enough to just, if you're a casual player, come in here, you're getting 60 FPS, which, was considered and still is considered in many games on console to be, right where you want to be at. But really the nice thing, and, has been a nice thing for a long time on PC, is that you can kind of make your choices. You can come in here, you can adjust, fine-tune some settings, maybe get a little bit more FPS, maybe drop your FPS a little bit and clean up some of the things that you don't like visually about the medium preset. But really, pretty solid performance here, all things considered, on, about a $300 GPU, especially in the market today. Definitely not upset about this performance whatsoever. But I imagine most people, and like myself, you'd want a bit more. So let's just go, and definitely when you're playing at 4K, you can definitely use FSR, and let's just put it on balance for now. And, FSR really shines at higher resolutions because a lot of times, even on weaker models like FSR 3, it's not going to really look too bad. Even TAA doesn't look too bad. Pretty much everything that you do when you're working with more pixels to begin with, you're going to get a really solid picture. So let's see generally what performance we're getting here, if I can get into a spot where I'm not going to die right away. But yeah, as you can see, at 4K using that balance preset, the image still looks pretty sharp. Definitely no major complaints here. And now this shoots us right into that 100 FPS range. It is also nice to see that even on, native resolution, it's not a major issue when it comes to our video memory. Although not a major concern for us anyways, because we have so much video memory to kind of spare. But sitting right around 100 FPS or so, generally playing here, is definitely a really, really good spot to be at here on the medium preset at least. And in fact, because we are getting, pretty solid looking picture here, I'm even comfortable going all the way to ultra performance, which is obviously asking a lot of this FSR model, but just to show that, you can come in here and kind of, make these little changes here and there. And now where we were getting, natively at this, on these settings, natively around 60 FPS, now we're getting much, much higher FPS, close to like, I think I was saying like around like 160 even, 130, 140. So definitely now catapulting you right into that competitive type FPS range. So definitely nice to see that, you know, you have so much flexibility and you are able to really, you know, pick and choose what kind of performance you want to get here without really, you know, any major drawbacks when it comes to your visual quality. Still looks incredibly sharp. Honestly, really impressed with the general model here, and especially considering the fact that we're not even using the FSR4 machine learning. And I have hope, you know, that will be implemented, and obviously, you know, if that does get implemented, that will just make even stronger case for the 9060 XT being more than enough across a variety of different resolutions, going all the way up to 4K in a game like Battlefield. So really happy with the performance here overall, especially on the medium preset. Now, we saw that medium was within our capabilities with some upscaling, so let's just see, just for fun here, what high will do. We'll go for Ultra 4K here. I think that is probably a fool's errand. So let's just go for high here, and let's just see what this will do if we just leave it on native TAA. Let's see if this is even remotely playable. So here on high settings, we are definitely starting to see the limitations of the GPU hitting right around 46 on our average, 47 now, climbing a little bit. You can also see our video memory kind of spiking up really high, or higher than we've really seen before, sitting right around 10.5 gigabytes. So definitely, you know, not really where you want to be playing at high settings, at least at native here, but that's not really what we came to see. You know, probably could have put that together, but really what I'm curious is if we can make it work with a bit of that upscaling, because we are on 4K, even the fact that we don't have, you know, FSR4. FSR3 is plenty for our purposes here. So let's implement a bit of that FSR and see if we can get into a playable frame rate. We're not far off. We're really just like, you know, if we're looking for 60, we're definitely not far off at all. And honestly, you know, my takeaway here, going between medium and high, I don't know. I guess I would need to see some side-by-sides, but I'm not seeing a massive difference in the actual visuals here. But we'll implement a bit of FSR and see where we can get to. So let's just go for FSR here. Not ultra performance quite yet. Let's just go for balance and see where that gets us to. So balanced FSR does now bring us up into a territory where we are getting now definitely playable above 60. I wouldn't say, you know, not quite in that competitive type range that I typically want to be at in a first-person shooter, but definitely close enough to where, you know, if I was playing about 85 on our average we're seeing so far here, definitely a good enough experience to where I can jump in here, have fun, play the game, and I'm not really going to be thinking too much about the performance or lack of performance that I'm getting. So the other thing too is our video memory. We're certainly happy to have more than 8 gigabytes at this point, given the fact that we are sitting right around 9.5. So definitely one of those times where having the 16 gigabyte model is certainly going to be beneficial. Now let's go a bit further than balanced here, and let's just go all the way down actually to ultra performance, just to see what the picture quality looks like and the type of performance we can expect here. So honestly, as far as picture quality here, ultra performance, in my opinion, it looks okay. It doesn't look too blurry or anything like that. There's not any sort of like super distracting visual artifacts. Our video memory is still sitting pretty high even here on ultra performance, but we are now reaching that competitive type FPS, sitting right around 120. So really great performance here out of our 9060 XT. This is definitely, you know, if I was in the position to be buying a card right around this price point, this is definitely the first card that I'd really be looking at. I just think the performance here is pretty undeniable that you're getting out of this card. And this is even without that FSR4, which, you know, I'm hoping, I know I've mentioned a few times, but I am really hoping that FSR4 is implemented in this title, and just, you know, hopeful that it gets broader support in general, but certainly does seem like this is a good candidate for it, because we're just at native resolution, sitting right below where we want to be at, so it's not far off. And having to use FSR, obviously on the newer generation of AMD GPUs, you want to be on FSR4. I will say that's one advantage that NVIDIA seems to have, is just that they've been using machine learning upscaling for so long that it's much easier and to kind of go in and implement, you know, a different model of DLSS than it is to come in here and implement FSR4. But regardless, 9060 XT, really every time I've tested this card, I come away impressed, and with Battlefield 6, it's no different. It seems to be a absolute killer of a card. Even the 8GB model here would likely see very, very similar results, except when we get to 4K and we're kind of pushing into that 10GB neighborhood. That's where I would, definitely be surprised if the 8GB card was able to kind of hang in there with the 16GB variant. But regardless, really, really solid performance, and seems to be a really solid option if you're looking to play Battlefield 6. Anyways, guys, that's been it for the 9060 XT in Battlefield 6. Really great performance. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.